Welcome back to TheChowTimePod. It's your host, Red. I got a video today from Kate and Michelle. Again, please like, subscribe, comment down below. I really appreciate that. Let's get that ciao. You know, this is probably my fourth video that I featured from Kate, and she's done wonderful work. I'm enjoying her content. I'm enjoying her take, and she's been trying to really stay, not too biased towards things. Hell, that's even better than me. I'm a little biased towards a lot of my views too, so.
She held my eyes open while she sprayed bleach into them.
She threatened me with knives. She bit me. She punched me.
The isolation was probably the hardest thing to deal with. Not actually having anybody else to talk to about it.
It's a study of 465 students in Israel dating couples, and which found no significant difference between the percent of women and men who assaulted a partner. 28% of the men assaulted 25% of the women, about the same percent.
Equality, but laws don't see it that way, right? We know that women hit men and or domestic violence goes back and forth almost the exact same rates.
1 in 3 men experience interpartner violence within their lifetime. Nearly half of all domestic violence incidents involve mutual violence. Interestingly, women initiate domestic violence at equal or even slightly higher rates than men do. While the mainstream narrative has long painted domestic violence as a one-sided issue, violent men, helpless women. But what happens when the roles are reversed? When men are the victims and women are the abusers? It's time we open the doors to a room that nobody seems to want to enter, but one that's certain.
It's a sad room, and it's a really sad room. Like, most men don't even want to enter this because most men aren't going to experience the exact same thing. So even other men are going to maybe slightly belittle the experience sometimes. Lately, I've had, even one of my friends was talking about, he called somebody. We were talking about a story time. And I'm talking about a gentleman that, there's a woman that works for us. She does a little bit of side work for us, and we haven't really hired her for a couple weeks. And my partner was asking me what happened with her? And I was like, oh, she got in trouble. They got into a domestic violence dispute, and then her boyfriend called the cops. And his response was, oh, what a bitch! Why did he call the cops? And I had to correct my partner immediately, and I was like, why do you think he's a bitch? What do you expect this man to do? If this woman was hitting on him or attacking him, he has no way to be able to hit her back without any repercussions. So the only thing he really truly can do is to call the cops. And I think it's actually very brave to call the cops, because even when the cops come, there's still a good chance they're going to take him to jail and not her. So I don't think it's a pansy move for men to be calling the cops on their women that are beating them, because it is what is supposed to happen. Stop. Us men really need to stop the thinking that we're above calling the cops. We're above being abused. No, we can be abused just like women can be abused. It's okay to call the cops, to need help, because you can't fix this issue on your own. This is the problem. Men cannot fix a domestic violence issue on their own. Cops and things have to come in.
Certainly exists. We need to shine light on the real statistics around abuse towards men that get brushed under the rug, ignored, and even justified by the believe all women mentality. In any instance of abuse, society seems to believe that men are always guilty, and when women are accused, well, we want to hear her side of the story. I'm here to tell the heartbreaking stories of men who have not only been abused, but ignored altogether, simply for being a man. As I often do when something comes to light, I polled my audience as a response to a comment left on one of my videos. I read their stories, and I was shocked to see what some of them had gone through. Many of
I love women like Kate. Well, at least she is experiencing things. She's reading through things. She's putting herself out there to understand men, to get the experience of men. That's so wonderful. I don't know if she's a chameleon. She doesn't seem like she's a chameleon. Sometimes it's hard to tell about chameleons, but the genuineness of this woman, I can kind of somewhat see it. And she covers the hard topics. So shout outs to you, Kate.
of which left me in disbelief. While the majority of experiences that we hear about men involve men with status, significance, and plenty of resources, but we don't consider the pain of the average man next door. The men who are working hard yet remain invisible to the rest of society, while suffering in silence in what feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Or the men who are alienated from their children due to the burden of proof that is always required for a man to protect his innocence, while the he said, she said tends to always favor what she said. By the time you've watched this video all the way through, you'll be well aware of
Dude, I might be tearing up in this video. We'll see.
the two-way street that this issue actually is. And the saying, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, is alive and well.
That is such a true statement. That's why it's put into the Bible.
Via financial, psychological, sexual, cyber, as well as emotional and physical abuse. We say we want equality.
Give the people what they want.
Well, here it is. Now, let's dive into it. The first
Let's
thing
go.
that we need to clarify is what abuse actually is in its entirety, and all of the things that underpin it. Now, the first form is the most obvious, physical abuse. Initially, the images that may come to your mind are women with bruises who've been wrongly assaulted, but rarely do we see the same level of enthusiasm when it comes to men who are battered by their wives. Like the story of a man who's hit, punched, slapped, threatened with knives, and terrified of reporting the issue because if he does, she'll say he started it, and it was simply self.
And that would be the other part of it, right? Even if we are getting abused and stuff like that, women can easily flip the script by just banging their head on a table or something really quickly, and boom, there goes your livelihood.
Defense. That's because the stories of psychological abuse or emotional abuse towards men are much.
I don't think it's hard at all. Men's minds are weak nowadays. We're not strong as we used to be, like our forefathers. We weren't raised with strong mentalities, strong morals, strong compasses like guiding us. Now, because we're so weak in our mentality, women run circles around us to be able to manipulate us so easily.
Easier to twist into a story that fits your view of reality, often believing that she was forced to do so because of something that he did. Now maybe this story will resonate because it happens more often than you think. Society rarely, if ever, treats any sort of abuse from a woman seriously. Men who are teenagers that are approached by female teachers are not given the same treatment that teenaged girls approached by male teachers are often
100%.
given. Men are literally beaten and killed by women are not given the same level of justice as women who are beaten
True.
and killed by men. It is a tragedy when anyone goes through this, but for some reason we simply don't care when it happens to men. Men are expected to police their own because these bad men are the men all of us are judged by, while no such requirement exists for women, and their same behaviors are often justified. I was physically abused and gaslit constantly by my mother growing up, and nobody stopped her. I had to be the one to do it when I got big enough. I was emotionally manipulated and gaslit by
Oh, I can't even imagine how many stories are like this with mothers involved with sons. I want to assume most mothers are gaslighting their kids just in general.
two women I dated before I met my wife. My older brother suffered some very psychotic behavior from a woman that included kidnapping of his kids that she had left with him previously. My younger brother also suffered psychological and mental abuse at the hands of my mother. Nobody has done anything about them because the current line of logic is that the man in any situation must have done something to deserve it, something that does not pass the gender swap test. But go through the media, songs like Before He Cheats by Carrie Underwood glorified destruction of property but would never pass the gender swap test. Women can throw drinks in the face of even good men in the media and in real life, when throwing a drink in anyone's face is technically assault with no repercussions, even though that would never pass the gender swap test. The only media depictions of SA are done to women to draw attention to the issue, but the same stories would never pass the gender swap test. A few examples of women beating and killing full-grown men exist, and pretty much all of them paint her as the victim. The song Earl by Dixie Chicks was a couple of women getting away with murder just because the man they killed was physically abusive, arguably justifiable to me because both were wrong, but Earl should have gone to prison instead of being poisoned and dumped into a lake with weights to make sure he'd never be found. The pervasive belief is that all men are evil and all women are good. As a man, I know this. I know her word will always beat mine with no burden of proof required on her end. I know society supports her miles more than it will ever me, and I will still pay for it. Knowing this is reason enough to be evasive, since you never know if she'll take advantage of that power, but it winds up being just one reason in a quiver full of reasons.
And the thing is, all women, we can wield this power. That's the crazy thing. All women have the ability to wield this power. It's just Hopefully you get one that doesn't want to use it, nor care to use it. But every woman has this ability. This is why men, you have to protect yourselves.
Is that half or more of men are disengaging from any sort of interaction with women. And when I tell you that the stories get more and more awful, I'm not joking. How many men are threatened with losing everything if they say anything? How many women weaponize and leverage their children in the middle of a conflict? How many men bear the burden of psychological warfare only to remain silent because the crux of their social and cultural norms and expectations put the burden on them simply because they're men? But it gets even more sinister than just weaponizing children. These types of claims can ruin a man's entire life.
Correct.
Without any evidence that he's even guilty. False allegations are readily available as a means of control. Bullet in the chamber ready to commit social homicide with no way of proving your innocence.
Again, every woman can wield this freaking revolver loaded with false allegations. All they gotta do is point and shoot, and we're screwed.
I've talked about the statistics surrounding men who are falsely accused of abuse, specifically when it comes to divorce court and custody battles. But there are many alternative forms of that abuse that weaponize fear and put men in positions of complete isolation, leaving them alone and completely hopeless. One false allegation can strip a man of his entire life's work, his character forever labeled with a scarlet letter that he never actually earned. Just from the ex-wife, I dealt with physical abuse, usually being hit with thrown objects such as dishes, books, whatever is at hand. Emotional abuse, constantly dehumanizing and frequent attempts to undermine any and all accomplishments. And financial abuse, taking out credit card lines of credit on my name without my permission or knowledge. She's also engaged in frequent attempts to isolate me from neighbors, friends, and even family, with a disturbingly high success rate. She also forced me to open up about my insecurities and spent years weaponizing them to the point where I developed an anxiety disorder, complete with her being able to trigger anxiety attacks at will as punishment. Now, many people question why men...
That one gave me a little bit of goosebumps. The amount of control women can exert on men is nothing to joke about.
Are emotional stones. But imagine opening up your vulnerabilities only to be emasculated and weaponized with them. Would you also stifle that expression? Because I transparently absolutely would. When she filed for divorce, she claimed I was the one who was abusive to the courts when demanding the maximum rewards allowable by law, spread outright lies about me to my neighbors, coworkers, acquaintances, members of her church, and even my close family in efforts to further destroy me. Sadly, this worked in most cases, and even after finally being rid of her, my relationship with nearly everyone I had ever met never fully recovered. My ex-wife went to war with me after ending our marriage with adultery. For 8 years, she waged lawfare against me in attempts to obtain sole custody of our child. It started with family court and false abuse allegations, and then elevated to criminal with false accusations. This led to being briefly incarcerated and on trial for life in prison with zero evidence and passing a polygraph. She obtained sole custody and alienated me from my child's life. If that isn't domestic violence, I don't know what is. Now, verbal abuse is another layer that falls underneath emotional abuse. And this includes name-calling, sarcasm as a means of condescending.
Yeah, the condescending sarcasm. Women love to say it. I see it on like dating profiles a lot. Like, get used to me making fun of you. You know, like, don't be hurt when I make fun of you. And all of these, I see those on there constantly. And it's like, why do you need to constantly make fun of me? That doesn't even make sense. If I was constantly making fun of you, would that be a problem?
Or insulting your partner, emasculating your partner in front of friends, family, or in private. And this is also something that women will strategically do more often than men as a means of control and manipulation. It's often used to undermine a person and how they feel. Going back to the idea of weaponizing vulnerabilities, you can weaponize somebody's emotions to elicit a behavior. That is manipulation. Statistics show that 12% of women and 17% of men experience verbal abuse in relationships. And unfortunately, this is typically a stepping stone into physical abuse. And under verbal abuse, we have to discuss gaslighting, because this is not simply when somebody disagrees with you. The reality of gaslighting is convincing somebody that they do not see or experience what is actually happening. More formally, gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser makes the victim question their own reality.
I think that's what a lot of women nowadays are using that term for. It's just disagreement. But yes, gaslighting is to make you think that your perception of reality is incorrect and their perception is correct. That they're correcting you at what you're seeing and experiencing.
Perceptions or memory in order to gain power and control. Key signs are somebody saying that never happened when you know it did, minimizing somebody's feelings in the presence of an alarming experience, saying things like, "You're overreacting, stop being so sensitive, it was just a joke." Now, another layer of this is blame
that's
shifting,
definitely what women
which
say.
happens very often, specifically in narcissistic style relationships. But essentially, it's putting the blame on somebody else. You made me do it. If you hadn't done that, well, I wouldn't have X, Y, or Z. And this removes any layer of responsibility that they have to take. Another layer of this is twisting reality, aka gaslighting, but they also do it under the guise of being concerned. For example, you point out something that they've done that they say they would never do, and then they say, "You're acting really paranoid. I'm getting worried about you. I think you need to get some help." Lastly, just completely rewriting history. Again, a form of gaslighting where they tried to manipulate your memory. Things like, "I never said that. You're not remembering that correctly, but you know you do," and they did. Now, the next layer of this is one that's going to be controversial, but as any form of abuse, it does require context, and this is sexual abuse. Now, we often think of this as
yeah, I can see this.
or SA, but there are more covert manners in which sexual abuse can happen. For example, emasculating a man's performance is a form of verbal and emotional abuse that is sexual in nature. But deeper than that, sex itself can be weaponized. This can be through withholding or leveraging sexual intimacy, particularly when it's used as a means of control, punishment, or coercion in a relationship. While it's not always classified under traditional definitions of abuse, it does fall under the category of psychological, emotional, or sexual abuse. Again, depending on the context and the intent. So how
well, for sure, withholding sex or using sex or weaponizing sex is definitely a form of abuse, in my opinion.
How can sex be weaponized in a relationship? And is this just me blaming women, or is this looking a little bit deeper at how manipulative some, not all, some can be? And by the way, I just want to highlight that this is not a one-sided issue. However, the discussion of this issue has been one-sided. So as I will continue this video, I am going to continue to highlight men's experiences, but this is not to diminish the experiences of women. They've gotten plenty of airtime. Number one.
Oh yeah, women have their issues too. I'm not saying they don't.
Withholding sex as a form of control or punishment. And I quote, "My ex was neglectful in every way a girlfriend should be there for a man. Emotionally, physically, sexually, and when I mentioned it, she would gaslight me into feeling like a bad person for even wanting to spend time, touch, or get intimate. We got engaged at 18, and by 21 she had cheated on me, blamed it on me, and manipulated me into feeling like I was the bad guy for getting mad about it. We stayed together for 7 years after that, and the whole time she remained so distant that eventually didn't want me around. Yet, when I went to break up with her, she had still tried to gaslight me into staying, claiming that she didn't know anything was wrong. I've been alone for going on 4 years now, and I wish I could say I was happy, but I'm not. Connecting with women is extremely hard now that my view on them has been so thoroughly tainted." How do we know if refusal around sexual intimacy?
I mean, that is a thing, right? When your view gets tainted, when a lot of men first take that pill, either orally or suppository, we get upset. A lot of men have that red pill rage because they realize the truth. They realize they were idiots. They realize they've been had. They've been duped. They've been freaking fooled this whole time. And then now they see the true nature of things. Who doesn't get upset
actually a
at
form
that?
of manipulation or honest. Like I said earlier, intent. Or where a partner refuses intimacy not due to personal reasons. Examples of stress, medical concerns, trauma, etc. But as a manipulation tactic to gain power in a relationship. And this is harmful because it allows one person to dictate the terms of intimacy and any ounce of affection. And it can cause emotional distress, resentment, and low self-esteem in one partner. And this also reinforces coercion through deprivation. This makes one partner feel like they have to comply with non-sexual demands to gain intimacy. The next layer of this is using sex as some type of bargaining tool, where one partner offers intimacy only if the other falls under certain conditions, such as doing favors, buying gifts, or giving into every demand. Now, this is harmful because
that's simp behavior. It's what's causing simps too. Is this is why I do feel somewhat bad for simps, because they are getting manipulated in a sense too.
Because it reduces intimacy to a transaction, which undermines genuine emotional connection. This can also be a form of coercion, so it makes the relationship feel completely conditional. And lastly, it creates an imbalance of emotional investment between the two, where it teaches one partner that they must constantly earn affection. The other way that sex can be manipulated is through...
Again, this is the game that women play on men. This is why so many simps are created. That sense of you have to do something or accomplish something to get some kind of love or affection back.
Guilt and obligation. This is where one partner might say, if you really loved me, you'd do X. Or you've got covert contracts, which are, well, I did this, so you owe me that. This can create problems in a relationship, obviously, because then some of the intimacy that is experienced is not necessarily consensual and creates an environment where sex is expected and not necessarily mutually desired. And ultimately, this can lead to resentment and emotional detachment over time. Now, the next layer is a little bit more sinister, and this is where a partner intentionally alternates between extreme affection and complete withdrawal. And this is a means to control another person's emotions. And this mimics intermittent reinforcement. And this is a psychological manipulation tactic that is used in abusive relationships. Huge red
Women say that men do this tactic a lot.
flag. Huge. And it makes the victim more emotionally dependent on the abuser. And they wait for good behavior to be rewarded via intimacy or otherwise. But this leads to emotional instability and self-doubt in the other partner. And this format at its fundamental principle, again, not always aligned with sexual intimacy, but in general, is very, very common in narcissistic relationships. Again,
Makes
to be
sense.
clear, not having sexual intercourse is not a means of abuse. However, the intent behind the behavior can be manipulative, emotionally and psychologically abusive. And this would mean that it's a repeated tactic to gain control, coercion, or punishment. Now,
Makes
another
sense.
layer of this that is not often discussed, but men certainly take the brunt of, would be financial abuse. This includes running up somebody's credit card, draining their bank account, threatening to take everything if they were to report the issue or say anything. Now, I would also be remiss if I did not discuss the fact that there can be financial power imbalances within a relationship. This is where one person, who typically makes the majority of the money, controls the behavior of another person or weaponizes the ability to acquire resources if they do not fall in line. Now, typically this is seen as a male to female dynamic, but remember, in the modern world, this can be flipped, where 40% of women out-earn their spouse. Lastly, but certainly not least,
Nope, I know a few couples that are like this, that the woman out-earns them and she controls the crap out of them.
we have revenge porn or digital abuse. This could be threatening to release explicit photos or videos, reputation slandering via social media or other.
This was definitely used to be something that men did a lot more back in the day, but nowadays I think women do it to such a high degree just because they share everything. They constantly, share their personal lives and share people's pictures and things to get opinions from everybody.
Otherwise, or harassing people and their new partners, like a psychopath.
Ooh.
Now, in a more disappointing light, we have the evidence that shows partner violence is both equally experienced and exercised by men and women.
Correct.
That's right, equally. But that is not covered publicly, so I have to ask why. Well, Strauss has covered this at length in his research and in one of his major papers, which I am going to read a few segments of here to give you a better understanding of where the data went, why it was removed, and the pressures to keep it out of the mainstream. There are 7 methods that researchers and publishers have used to keep this stuff out of public discourse. Number 1, well, just conceal the evidence. And I quote, "Perhaps the most frequent method of dealing with the unacceptable evidence that women assault partners at the same or higher rates as men is to conceal the evidence. The pattern was established early in the research on partner violence by a survey conducted for the Kentucky Commission on Women. This excellent survey found about equal rates of assault by men and women, but only assaults committed by men were published in the report. The upper half of figure 3, which I'll show you right here, shows prevalence rates by gender in the publication version of a Canadian study. In the published version, the lower half of this figure, the wife-to-husband data is absent. Although at least 200 papers report research that has found gender symmetry, many studies with similar...
This is why it's sometimes hard to believe scientists or believe some of the data that we do get, because They get manipulated.
The results are not submitted for publication because the authors thought that a paper showing gender symmetry in partner violence would not be accepted, or the authors feared adverse effects on their reputation entirely. And this brings us to method 2 of how to conceal the evidence.
Can't even tell the truth without getting canceled, even back then, guys. That's what they're pretty much saying.
Avoid obtaining evidence of female perpetration in the first place. The Canadian National Violence Against Women Survey used the Conflict Tactics Scales, or CTS, to obtain the data on partner violence for a sample of women. The CTS is based on family systems theory and therefore included items to measure violence by both partners. However, the designers of the Canadian study modified the CTS by deleting the questions on perpetration by the women interviewed. The result, of course, was data on victimization of women and none on the perpetration by women. And many other
If you're not even going to ask them if they're doing bad things, then of course they're not doing bad things.
studies have used this strategy. And as the data continues to become available, the data on men being victims and women being perpetrators continued to be removed and ignored. Method 3, selective citations in the research. Both individual researchers and government agencies deny the evidence by citing the few studies that show men's predominance in partner violence and do not mention the huge number of studies that have found symmetry. The World Health Organization report on violence is an important example because it is by leading scholars and is widely read and respected. One can read the entire report, which has impressively detailed documentation of studies on male perpetrations, and not find a citation of any of the almost 200 studies that have found that women also assault their partners, except for a small section that notes that women do so in self-defense. And this moves us to method 4, state conclusions that contradict the data. An article published in 1997 described self-defense as the primary act of partner violence by women, but the data shows that only 6.9% of women act in self-defense. An article published in 2005 found that men and women differ in their motivations for contributing to partner violence, but that's not what the data actually says. And I quote, "What do the results show? A factor analysis of the questions found 3 factors. Women have a significantly higher score on one of the 3 factors. It is labeled striking back for abuse. However, that label is misleading. Shocker. It applies to only one of the 5 questions in the factor, to protect yourself. The other 4 questions tell a different story than the name given to the factor. They are to get back at your partner for hurting you emotionally, which is a measure of anger motivated violence, by the way. To get your partner to stop doing something, which is a measure of coercion. To get back at your partner for hitting you first, which measures retaliation, not self-defense. And to show anger. That is significantly different for men and women is as much or more about coercion and anger as about striking back. The other 2 factors tell the opposite story.
Well, because men know not to strike. We don't just go striking people willy-nilly, at least normal smart men. There are idiots out there that just do stupid things, but yeah, we know if we just strike random men, we're going to get struck back or die. Those possibilities are there.
Than the response to prior abuse conclusion. One is disciplining a partner with items such as to get your partner to do what you wanted. The other is exerting power with items such as to feel more powerful. Men and women did not differ on either disciplining a partner or exerting power. That is, women use violence to exert power and punish their partner just as often as men do. And the next layer to this, method 5, is blocking publications. This method of denial mostly works through self-censorship by authors who fear their article will be rejected or that it will undermine their reputation. And he gives a really clear example of how this happened.
I do that too. I self-censor because, YouTube tells me stop being a naughty boy.
In the process of this. A dramatic example occurred while this article was being written. A colleague co-authored an article with me that dealt with gender symmetry. She probably did 60% of the work on the article. During the course of our collaboration, she learned about the harassment and penalization of some researchers who have published on gender symmetry. This will come later in another method, by the way. That led her to withdraw from co-authorship of an important article. She was coming up for tenure and promotion review and feared authorship of that article would adversely affect the chances for a successful review value, and also a more general stigmatization that could make finding an alternative position difficult. If her perception of the threat was wrong, the fact that her fear and its effect on her scholarly work was real. Method 6. Prevent the funding of research that would investigate female partner violence.
Makes
In
sense.
December of 2005, the National Institute of Justice invited grant proposals to investigate partner violence and sexual violence. It stated that studies involving men victims are not eligible for funding, but equality.
Wow.
And Method 7. Harass, threaten, or penalize researchers who publish evidence on gender symmetry. And I quote, "Because being harassed or penalized is not mentioned in public articles, most of the examples in this section refer to instances in which I have been the target. However, a number of others have experienced similar treatment, and some examples are presented. The most extreme example was the experience of Susan Steinmetz. Sorry if I get that wrong. When she was at the University of Delaware and was being reviewed for promotion and tenure, there was an organized attempt to block her appointment through unsolicited letters to her department and the university president. They asserted that she was not a suitable person to promote because her research showing high rates of women's perpetration of partner violence was not believable. In short, they accused her of scientific fraud. An academic version that implies fraud is Fleck and colleagues from 1978. Even more extreme, there was a bomb threat at a daughter's wedding. At the University of Manitoba, a lecturer's contract was not renewed because of protests about her research, which found approximately
Like, just telling the truth here, you get bomb threats. I can't even imagine Elon trying to, like, fix all of this corruption. How many freaking stethoscopes are on this man?
equal rates of partner violence by women and men. Is anybody else's head spinning? We can't be honest. We want the truth, but we can't handle the truth. What is this? However, at a larger picture, you might be going, why does this matter? Why are we talking about the research? Here's a
Oh, it fucking matters.
publication. Why are people not talking about it? Not a big deal, but it matters. And it
It
matters
matters.
because there are consequences to this. This means that every story that is published, every media take on this subject is
We're always the
biased
evil
and
ones.
untrue. And it continues to drive the pictures that we paint, and then screens for the stories that we're willing to accept or not based on believability versus
Right? So it's just like the Stanford guy or whatever, I forgot his name. Just like those incidences. If we don't have any precedents of men not doing horrible things, or like everything is just one-sided to women, doesn't matter what men do in reality nowadays. Just because as long as it is viewed a certain way, we're screwed.
versus true evidence. And we can look at this from a different, similar example, if you will. But homicide rates. TV statistics in the US competed by increasing their coverage on crime. And as a result of this, the coverage itself increased by 473%. And the homicide rate that they were covering actually decreased by 33%. But the public opinion was wildly different, thinking that things were escalating over time. Alternatively, the coverage on homicides where men killed women are publicized 79% of the time, where when the opposite happens, a woman killing a man, those are published less than half of the time and get like half of the airtime. And Strauss also discusses this in his paper. Another misrepresentation of partner violence by the press is the emphasis on horrific cases of men who virtually enslave and torture women partners. Those cases sell newspapers and attract TV audiences,
I can see that.
but are less than half of 1% of the segment of couples who experienced an incident of partner violence in the previous 12 months. This leads the public to think that the typical partner violence case is a beaten down, physically injured, and virtually enslaved
I say it all the time. They always seem to think that men are just beating, slapping women left and right all over the streets. It ain't happening like that.
female victim. It is very likely that almost all of the perpetrators of these rare cases are men. However, featuring them leads the public to think that men predominate in all cases of partner violence, which again, the data shows that is not true. So with the odds stacked against men, what do we do? First, understanding and looking at the actual data and the reality of these situations is the only way that we can start to change the conversation. Scholars need to be able to publish their research, and we need to have the stomach to be able to accept that women aren't always as innocent as we think that they are. Scholars shouldn't be pushed to deny or conceal evidence. And as a consequence to being able to talk about it, we can also provide the same level of attention and resources to men who deserve just as much as women do. But in the meantime, before all of these things may or may not happen, I would encourage you to do a few things if you find yourself or somebody else in this position. Remember, unfortunately and unfairly, men, you must protect yourself in a society that will see you as guilty.
At all all
so you have to be able
times.
to prove your innocence. This means record, keep records of what's happening, get details as much as you can, and maintain the evidence securely.
Once anything starts going left, start recording, guys. Start recording.
To get support, there are many communities, certainly not as many as on the female side, but there are communities and spaces that are here for men's rights and protecting male victims of partner violence. In the show notes below, I am going to leave a link to a platform that I found while I was doing research for this on men. Now, it's important to note that just because you see my video with screenshots of people telling their stories, this is a small pocket of men that are in
Correct.
my audience. I don't have a huge freaking audience, okay?
You do have a pretty small audience. You only have 30K. You should definitely have some more.
But there are millions of
Shout outs to you and give her some subs, guys. Go support this woman. Going on the hard subjects and stories.
men who are physically, emotionally, psychologically, sexually, financially controlled. And we need to start talking about that. The assault based on the data. This is not a biased opinion. I'm not trying to beat down women or do anything of the kind. I am trying to shine a light on an issue that is true and honest and real.
Correct.
Women are just as likely to assault as men are likely to assault women. This isn't a man versus bear conversation, which is ridiculous, by the way. In instances of abuse, not only does the burden of proof always fall on men, they need to have a mountain of proof to have any fighting chance at keeping their reputation and their livelihood intact.
And even then, with that mountain of proof, you still lose everything. Look at Johnny. Poor Johnny.
Many women will come into my DMs, into my comment section, into my email, and tell me that I'm not being a girl's girl. Well, if being a girl's girl means enabling your poor behavior and allowing you to continue to exercise entitlement with no repercussions or consequences, then you're right. I'm not a girl's girl.
Shout outs to you.
The link to the study, which I would encourage you all to read, will be linked in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this, thank you. Now, if you enjoyed this and hearing from my audience, then you might enjoy this video.
Shout outs to Kate. I really thoroughly enjoyed that one. Some of the things just give me so much heartache and like chills because the things that are being said in there I've experienced. I'm sure a lot of the people around me have experienced the stories I've heard from you guys, and it's nice to have women acknowledging that. That's all it is, really. Just more women to acknowledge these things. That's all men kind of want. Instead of just gaslighting us, thinking that we're completely wrong in our thought process, that we're not the evil ones. No, women are evil too. Please subscribe, comment down below. I really appreciate that, and I can do this.